The brutal truth about why you feel lost in life? Alan Watts explained. Have you ever looked at your life and quietly asked yourself a question you were afraid to say out loud? What am I actually doing with my life? Maybe you have a job. Maybe you make money. Maybe you have a family. Maybe people look at you and think you are doing perfectly fine. But somewhere inside you, there is a strange feeling that something is missing. You wake up. You work. You pay your bills. You take care of responsibilities. You scroll through other people's lives. You watch successful people becoming richer, healthier, happier, and more accomplished. And then, when the noise finally stops, you are left with one uncomfortable question. Is this really the life I was meant to live? If you have ever felt lost in life, I want you to hear this carefully. You may not actually be lost. You may simply be exhausted from trying to become someone you were never meant to be. And this is where the philosophy of Alan Watts becomes incredibly powerful. Because perhaps the problem isn't that you haven't found your purpose. Perhaps the problem is that you've been taught to believe your life must have one perfect purpose waiting somewhere ahead of you. A perfect career, a perfect relationship, a certain amount of money, a certain level of success, a certain version of yourself. And until you reach it, you believe you are failing. But what if life doesn't work that way? What if your life is not a destination you have failed to reach? What if it is something you are supposed to experience? Alan Watts often challenged the idea that life should be treated merely as a race towards some final achievement. And that idea matters because millions of people are living as if their real life will begin later. When I make more money, when I get married, when I become successful, when I retire, when I become respected, when I finally have enough. But there is a dangerous word hiding inside all of those sentences. When. When becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next year. Next year becomes another decade.
And suddenly, you wake up one morning and realize you spent most of your life preparing to live instead of actually living. You were never promised a straight road. One of the reasons people feel lost in life is because they expect life to move in a straight line. School, career, marriage, money, success, retirement, happiness. But real life doesn't follow a straight line. People lose jobs, businesses fail, relationships end, parents grow old, friends disappear, plans collapse. People change. And sometimes the identity you spent 20 years building no longer fits the person you have become.
That can feel like failure. But sometimes it is transformation. Think about a tree. A tree doesn't spend its life asking, "Am I behind?" It doesn't look at another tree and say, "That tree has more branches than me." It grows according to its nature. It bends when the wind comes. It loses its leaves. It survives storms. And then it grows again. Human beings are different because we have imagination. We can compare ourselves with millions of people we have never met. We look at someone else's success on a screen and use it as evidence that our own life is inadequate. And this is one of the great traps of modern life. You are comparing your behind the scenes with someone else's highlight reel. You see their success. You don't see their fear. You see the house. You don't see the debt. You see the relationship. You don't see the private arguments. You see the business. You don't see the years it nearly failed. You see the destination. You don't see the price. And then you conclude, "I am lost." No, You may simply be comparing two completely different journeys. Your life does not need to look impressive to be meaningful. This is a hard lesson. Society teaches us to measure our lives through visible achievements. Your salary, your house, your car, your title, your followers, your business, your possessions, your social status. And there is nothing wrong with ambition. Money matters. Success matters.
Building something meaningful matters. But when achievement becomes your only definition of worth, you become a prisoner of comparison. Because there will always be someone richer, someone younger, someone more successful, someone more attractive, someone with more followers, someone who appears further ahead. If your peace depends on being ahead of everyone else, you have created a race you can never finish. And this is why some successful people still feel empty. They achieved the thing they thought would finally make them happy. Then they discovered that the finish line had moved. They bought the house. Then they wanted a bigger house. They reached one income level. Then they needed another. They gained recognition. Then they needed more recognition. They achieved the goal, then immediately created another goal. And there is nothing wrong with growth. The problem begins when you secretly believe, I will finally become enough when I achieve enough. You were already a human being before you achieved anything. Never forget that. Perhaps you don't need to find yourself. We hear this phrase constantly. Find yourself. But perhaps there is another way to look at it. Maybe you don't need to find yourself. Maybe you need to remove everything that isn't you. Remove the expectations. Remove the need to impress people. Remove the fear of disappointing everyone. Remove the belief that your life must look like someone else's.